The betrothal announcement hit the chamber like a grenade. Caliph Velsorin, first daughter of the Velanthi dominion, stood on the raised obsidian dais while her mother's voice rang through the Hall of Thorns with the precision of a blade drawn across glass. 12 warlords, 12 systems, 12 suitors summoned to bid for her hand, and not one of them had asked whether Caliph wanted to be bid upon. She kept her face composed. She had trained since girlhood to keep her face composed. But her hands, hidden inside the ceremonial sleeves of her coronation silk, were shaking. The succession right of Velsorin demands it, her mother had said that morning, as if the words were law carved in neutronium rather than a tradition 3 centuries old. You will stand. You will be presented. You will accept the strongest. Caliph had not argued. Arguing with sovereign Ilyara was like arguing with a bulkhead. The shape would not change, no matter how many times you struck it. Now the 12 stood arranged in a crescent before her, each armored in the colors of their fleet. The hulking Drethani in crimson plate, the twin Corveth admirals in mirrored silver, the aged but vicious consul Terrigen in carbon-black scales. Each of them looked at her like a prize. Each of them calculated her value in fleet alliances and genetic pedigree and territorial expansion. None of them looked at her like a person. Caliph's gaze moved along the crescent and stopped not on a warlord, but on the figure standing apart from the formation, near the leftmost pillar. A human. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, jaw-scarred from something old. He wore no ceremonial armor, just a battered service jacket with a faded logistics patch on the shoulder, standing with his hands behind his back and his expression perfectly neutral. Commander Soren Voss, assigned to her security detail 18 months ago by an alliance trade agreement nobody had cared about. He was not a suitor. He was furniture to these people, a treaty-required human presence tolerated in the Dominion's orbit the way one tolerates a stain on an old uniform. She looked at him because he was the only one in the room not calculating her worth. His eyes met hers for half a breath. Something settled in them. Not encouragement, not pity, just a quiet steadiness that said, I see you, whatever you decide. The Drethani warlord stepped forward first. His bid was a fleet, 40 warships, deployed to the Dominion's northern corridor for 3 generations. The room murmured approval. Caliph said nothing. 3 days later, the selection trials began. That was the word her mother used, trials, as if the suitors were being tested, but Caliph knew the architecture of it. The trials existed to display the suitors' strength for the court's benefit. They were theater. The outcome was predetermined by alliance calculus. The Drethani warlord Vorek had already been chosen by Ilyara's council weeks before the announcement. The trials were a formality to make it look earned. Caliph was expected to sit in the observation gallery and watch, to be an ornament in her own succession. She did not sit. On the first morning, she walked into the trial chamber in combat armor she had commissioned in secret 6 months earlier, dark gray alloy, fitted to her frame, with no insignia and no house markings. The chamber went silent. First daughter, her mother's voice came from the sovereign's balcony, ice cold. Return to the gallery. Article 9 of the Right of Velsorin, Caliph said, her voice carrying the length of the hall, permits any member of the sovereign bloodline to enter the trials as a contender for their own hand. The silence deepened. She had spent 4 months in the Dominion's legal archives confirming it. Article 9 existed because 300 years ago, a Velsorin prince had won his own betrothal back by defeating his suitors in combat. The precedent had never been repealed, only forgotten. You cannot be serious, Consul Terrigen said from the contender line. I am standing in the contender line, Caliph said. I am armored. I have invoked the article by number. Whether I am serious is irrelevant to the law. Her mother's expression did not change, but the silence from the balcony lasted 4 full seconds, an eternity, in sovereign protocol. Proceed, Ilyara said finally. The word dropped like a hammer, and Caliph took her place in the line. The first trial was a tactical simulation, fleet deployment, across a contested nebula corridor. 7 of the 12 warlords treated it as a test of brute superiority, massing their forces at the primary choke point. Caliph split her simulated fleet into 3 dispersed wings and collapsed the corridor from all sides simultaneously. She placed second. The corvette Admiral Drennies placed first, but only by 2 points. The court whispered. No one had expected her to place at all. Soren Voss stood at the edge of the simulation chamber when she emerged, holding a canteen of water and her regular jacket. He did not congratulate her. He did not comment. He simply held out the canteen, and when she took it, his hand was steady. You have 17 minutes before the physical endurance qualifier, he said. She drank, I know. Your left greave shifted during the second hour. I noticed it binding on the stride. She looked at him. He looked back, that same unreadable composure, that same quiet certainty. Not a man trying to help her because he wanted something. A man noting a mechanical problem because it was his job to keep her alive, and a binding greave would slow her in a fight. Fix it, she said. He knelt, adjusted the strap with quick, competent hands, and stood again without a word. She walked back into the trial chamber. The second trial was single combat. Caliph had trained for this in secret for over a year, not with the court's ceremonial instructors, who taught ornamental forms designed to make royals look graceful, but with Voss. Every evening after the diplomatic schedule cleared, in a converted storage bay on the lower deck of the palace orbital, he had taught her the things he knew: how to move efficiently in armor, how to take a hit without freezing, how to find the structural weakness in a bigger opponent's stance. He had never gone easy on her. She had the bruises to prove it. Hidden beneath the ceremonial silks her attendants dressed her in each morning, fading yellow-green marks on her ribs and forearms that told the story of a princess who had chosen, in secret, to become something other than an ornament. Now she stood in the combat ring facing the Drethani warlord Vorik, 8 feet of scaled muscle and military reputation. His weapon, a curved energy glaive that hummed with a low, menacing frequency. Caliph held a single staff, Velanthi design, lightweight alloy, no edge, a defensive weapon. First daughter, Vorik said, his voice carrying the resonance of a species built for intimidation. You do not belong here. Yield, and I will remember your courage fondly when you are my wife. The word wife landed on her like a slap. She set her stance, left foot forward, weight centered, staff angled across her body, exactly the way Voss had drilled her 200 times in that converted storage bay. Begin, the trial adjudicator called. Vorik moved fast for his size, a sweeping overhead strike meant to overwhelm her guard and end it in one blow. The glaive screamed through the air. Caliph was not there. She stepped inside the arc, staff horizontal, and deflected the shaft of the glaive at its weakest point, the grip junction between blade and handle. The redirection sent the weapon's momentum sideways, and Vorik's own strength carried him past her. She struck his exposed knee joint, once hard. The Drethani buckled. The hall erupted. Vorik recovered. He was a warlord, not a sparring dummy, and the next exchange was brutal. He caught her staff on the backswing, hauled her forward, and slammed an elbow into her chest plate. She hit the ground. Something cracked, a rib maybe. The pain was a white flash behind her vision. Get up. Voss's voice in her memory. Not gentle, not encouraging, just factual. You're going to get hit. You're going to fall. Get up. That's the only thing that matters. She rolled, got her feet under her, and came up swinging. 3 rapid strikes to Vorik's weapon hand. The third one connected with enough force to numb his grip. The glaive clattered. Vorik lunged for it. Caliph planted her staff in the gap between his chest plate and shoulder guard and levered. The physics were simple. He was bigger, but she had the fulcrum. He went sideways, hit the mat on his back, and she pinned the staff across his throat. The adjudicator's signal pulsed green. Match concluded. Silence and then a roar from the lower galleries. The common soldiers, the support staff, the lesser-ranked attendants who had never been invited to an opinion about the succession, they were on their feet. Caliph stepped back. Her ribs screamed. Her hands were trembling inside her gauntlets, but her face was composed. She looked up not at the sovereign's balcony, not at the remaining suitors. At Voss, standing in the same spot by the pillar, arms folded, expression unchanged, but his chin had lifted, just slightly, the smallest acknowledgement. She did not need the roar of the gallery. That quiet lift was enough. The third trial was endurance. 72 hours of sustained command simulation, managing a fleet under constant pressure, making decisions without sleep, prioritizing resource allocation while fatigue degraded judgment. It was designed to break the weak and expose the reckless. By hour 40, 3 warlords had withdrawn. By hour 56, Consul Terrigen made a critical error, misallocated a supply convoy into an ambush corridor, and was eliminated. By hour 60, it was Caliph and 2 others, the Korvath Admiral Drenys and a younger warlord named Severith from the outer territories. Caliph's hands shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. The stimulant protocols her species allowed were long exhausted, and the raw cost of 3 days without true sleep pressed against the inside of her skull like a fist. But she had practiced this. Not the simulation, the endurance. 18 months of training sessions with Voss that started at 400 and ended when she collapsed. He had never pushed her past what she could build toward, but he had never let her quit a minute before it either. Your body wants to stop, he had told her once, resetting the sparring timer. Your mind wants permission, don't give it. She didn't. At hour 68, Severith folded. At hour 71, Drenys made his play, a brilliant flanking maneuver that would have destroyed her simulated flagship if she hadn't anticipated it. She had studied his pattern from the tactical trial. He always favored the left corridor, always committed too heavily to the first strike. She let him commit, let his flanking force overextend into what looked like an undefended corridor. Then she collapsed the corridor behind them, the same dispersal tactic she had used in the first trial, scaled up, refined. Drenys' fleet was cut in half. He stared at the display for 6 seconds. Then he input the withdrawal command. At hour 72, the simulation ended. Caliph Velsorin stood alone on the victor's mark. She did not feel triumphant. She felt hollowed out, a vessel emptied of everything except the single, unshakable fact that she had done it, on her own terms, through her own strength, without anyone's permission. The court did not celebrate. Sovereign Ilyara convened an emergency session of the Advisory Council within the hour. Caliph stood before them, still in her armor, unwashed, exhausted to the marrow, and listened while 11 advisors debated whether her victory was valid, whether Article 9 applied to female heirs, whether the Drethani alliance was now compromised, whether the human security liaison's influence constituted foreign interference. That last charge made her spine straighten. Commander Voss trained me, she said, cutting through Advisor Kella's mid-sentence. As is his contractual obligation under the security agreement. He trained me in defensive combat and endurance protocols because my safety is his assignment. If you wish to argue that a human teaching a Velanthi princess to defend herself constitutes interference, you are welcome to bring that argument to the Galactic Accord Arbitration Panel and explain why you believe your first daughter should be deliberately kept weak. The advisory chamber went very still. Kellas opened his mouth, closed it again. The rite has been fulfilled, Caliph continued. Article 9 is clear. The contender who prevails claims sovereign authority over their own betrothal. I prevailed. The matter is concluded. She looked at her mother. Ilyara's face was unreadable. That same controlled mask Caliph had inherited, had spent her whole life learning to wear. But something moved behind her mother's eyes. Not anger, not even surprise anymore. Recognition. The sovereign studying her daughter and seeing, for the first time, something she had not put there. The matter, Ilyara said slowly, is concluded. The warlords departed over the following 3 days. Most left in silence. They had been beaten fairly, and even the Drethani code required acknowledgement of a legitimate trial outcome. Vorik paused at the docking bay before boarding his cruiser and inclined his head toward Caliph, a gesture of warrior respect that cost him nothing but meant everything. Consul Terrigen was the exception. He left a formal protest with the Advisory Council, citing unprecedented irregularity and foreign contamination of Velanthi sovereignty. The protest was noted. It was not answered. The Corvette Admiral Drennies was the last to leave. He sought Caliph out in the corridor outside the council chamber, not to complain, not to challenge, but to ask one question. The dispersal tactic, he said. Hour 71. You used it in the first trial too, smaller scale, but the same architecture. You planned from the beginning to use the tactical trial as a rehearsal for the endurance trial. Yes, Caliph said. Drennies nodded slowly. Your human taught you that. He taught me to prepare, she said. The tactic was mine. The Corvette Admiral regarded her for a long moment. Then he smiled, thin, precise, genuine. Good, he said, and left. It was another 2 days before Caliph found Voss alone. He was in the converted storage bay, their training space, performing maintenance on his equipment. The same routine he ran every evening, checking his sidearm, inspecting the joints of his patrol armor, cleaning the practice staves and returning them to the rack. The methodical habits of a man who kept himself sharp because sharpness was all he had to offer. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. His hands moved with that same quiet efficiency, no wasted motion, no flourish. A man who existed at the intersection of discipline and patience, who had taught her everything she needed without once telling her what to do with it. Commander, she said. He looked up, set the stave on the rack, stood at something that was not quite attention but carried the respect of it. First daughter. The Advisory Council has accepted my invocation of Article 9, she said. My betrothal is my own to determine. No suitor will be assigned. Understood. She stepped into the room. The door closed behind her. The bay was lit by maintenance strips, cold white light that caught the angles of his face, the scar along his jaw, the early gray at his temples. There is a provision, she said. Once the sovereign heir claims authority over their own betrothal, they may choose, or they may decline to choose at all. The law allows both. Voss's expression did not change, but she saw the stillness settle deeper into him, the kind of stillness that meant he was listening with his whole body. There is no obligation, she said, no expectation, no debt. I am saying this because I want you to hear it clearly. I claimed my own hand so that whatever I do with it is mine, not a contract, not an alliance calculation, mine. I understand, he said, quiet, level. Good, she took another step. Then understand this too. I choose you, not because you trained me, not because you were kind when others weren't, not because you stood by that pillar every day and said nothing and expected nothing. I choose you because you are the only person in 18 months who looked at me and saw what I could become, and then stood back and let me become it. The silence that followed was absolute. Voss's jaw worked once. His eyes, gray-green, steady, the same eyes that had watched her fall in training and get up again 200 times, went very bright for a moment. He did not step forward. He did not reach for her. That was not who he was. He said, "You earned everything in that trial chamber." "I know. I want to be clear," he said, and his voice had dropped to something lower, rougher. "If you choose me, it's not because I'm easy to choose. I'm not Velanthi. I'm not royal. I have a security contract and a service record and exactly nothing else to offer a sovereign heir." "You have yourself," Caliph said, "and that is what I want." Another silence. Then Voss closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something had shifted, not his composure, never that, but the weight behind it. As if he had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and someone had finally said, "You can set it down." "Then yes," he said, simply, completely. Caliph nodded. Her hands were not shaking anymore. The formal announcement came a week later. Sovereign Ilyara delivered it personally, standing on the same obsidian dais where the betrothal had first been declared, facing the same hall of thorns, her voice carrying with the same precision. But the words were different. "The first daughter has exercised her sovereign right under Article 9 of the Right of Velsorin. She has prevailed in open trial against 12 contenders. Her choice of consort is her own." The hall listened. "She has chosen Commander Soren Voss of the Human Coalition. The Advisory Council has reviewed and accepted the selection." Murmurs, not the murmurs of disapproval, or not only that. The murmurs of a court recalculating, of a political landscape adjusting, of power structures realizing they had underestimated something fundamental about the woman standing beside the sovereign. Caliph stood next to her mother. She did not speak. She did not need to. Voss stood at the base of the dais, not beside her, not behind her, but at the position he had always occupied, slightly apart, slightly watchful, steady. He wore a clean dress uniform, dark gray, no medals, no insignia beyond the alliance patch on his shoulder, the same patch he had always worn. He did not look uncomfortable. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man standing exactly where he had decided to stand, and who would not move from it unless he chose to. Several of the remaining court officials exchanged glances. The younger advisors, the ones who had watched the trials from the lower galleries, who had been on their feet when Caliph pinned Vorek, nodded. Advisor Kellas said nothing. His formal protest had been withdrawn that morning, no explanation given. That evening, Caliph found Voss on the observation deck of the palace orbital. The viewport showed the Velanthi homeworld below, green-gold continents under cloud banks, the curved line of the Terminator casting half the planet in shadow. He was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at the planet the way a man looks at something he has protected for 18 months without being asked to care about it. "How does it feel," she said, stepping up beside him, "to be the consort of a sovereign heir?" "About the same as being her security detail," he said, "except now the advisory council has to pretend they're polite to me." She almost smiled. Almost. The Drethani ambassador has filed a second formal note. "Let him." The Korvath sent a gift, a tactical codex, addressed to the sovereign's champion, which is you, apparently. Voss made a sound that might have been a very quiet laugh. "Drenny's knows that was your fight." "He does." She turned to face him. The light from the viewport caught the angles of her face, high cheekbones, the faint luminescence that lived beneath Velanthi's skin in low light, the deep gold of her eyes. "He sent the gift to you because he respects what you represent. A human who was laughed out of the hall by 12 warlords and stood there anyway." "I wasn't in the trial." "You didn't need to be." She held his gaze. "You were in every hour of my preparation, every strike I landed, every time I got back up. You were the foundation under the floor. Everyone saw the building, but I know what holds it." Voss was quiet for a long time. The planet turned below them, slow, indifferent, ancient. "Your mother spoke to me," he said finally. Caliph raised an eyebrow. "About?" She said, "You are not what I would have chosen for her." And then she said, But I am beginning to understand that what I would have chosen and what she needs are not the same thing. Something moved in Calith's chest, a small, sharp thing, halfway between grief and gratitude. Her mother would never say those words to her directly. That was not how Ilyara operated, but she had said them to Voss, and that was its own form of acceptance. "What did you say?" Calith asked. "I said, your daughter doesn't need anything from me. She chose me, that's different." The words settled in the air between them like something set down gently, a thing finally named after months of existing unnamed. "That," Calith said quietly, "is why I chose you." The following months reshaped the Dominion in ways the Advisory Council had not anticipated. Calith did not become a different kind of ruler because of Voss. She became the ruler she had always been building toward, now with the authority to act on it. She restructured the military training programs to include practical defensive combat for all heirs, regardless of gender. She invoked Article 9's precedent to establish a formal right of contest for any betrothal dispute in the Dominion's legal code. She opened the Velanthi Officer Academy to cross-species candidates for the first time in 2 centuries. The first class included 4 humans. Voss remained her consort and her security chief. The dual role was unconventional, and the Advisory Council complained about it quarterly with decreasing conviction. He stood beside her in formal sessions and behind her in dangerous ones. He trained the new cross-species candidates with the same quiet rigor he had trained her. He never told her what to do. He never presumed to advise unless asked. He was not a co-ruler. He was not a puppet master. He was a man who stood where he stood and let her be what she was, and that, in a galaxy full of warlords and admirals and consuls who looked at a princess and saw a prize to be claimed, was the most radical thing anyone had ever offered her. The real test came 9 months after the formal announcement. A coalition of Outer Territory warlords, Consul Terrigen's allies, those who had never accepted the trial outcome, attempted a political coup. Not military, they were not stupid enough for that after watching Calith dismantle Vorek in single combat. Political. A constitutional challenge, filed simultaneously with 12 systems' legal bodies, arguing that Article 9 did not apply to female heirs and that the betrothal should be voided. The challenge was supported by a faction within the Advisory Council itself, 3 members who had quietly opposed Calith's reforms and saw the legal challenge as their chance to roll them back. Calith received the notification at 300. She was already awake. She had never returned to sleeping through the night after the 72-hour endurance trial, as if her body had decided that alertness was now its default state. Voss was awake too. He was always awake when she was. "How long do we have?" she asked. "The filing triggers a mandatory 30-day review period," he said. "After that, the Galactic Accord Arbitration Panel convenes. So we have 30 days to make the challenge irrelevant." "Calith," his voice was quiet, careful, "this isn't a sparring match. If the arbitration panel rules against you." "They won't. If they do, then I will file a counter-challenge under the same article and demand a second trial. Open, public. With the entire Accord watching." She turned to face him. "I won once, I will win again, and the precedent will be unbreakable." He studied her, that gray-green gaze steady, measuring not her capability, he knew that, but her resolve, whether this was anger or strategy. "It's both," she said, reading the question he hadn't asked, "but the strategy is sound." He nodded once, "Then we prepare." The 30 days were brutal. Calith assembled a legal team, not from the Advisory Council, which she could no longer trust fully, but from the Dominion's independent judiciary. 3 Velanthi legal scholars, 1 Korvath constitutional specialist, recommended improbably by Admiral Drennies, who sent a terse message. A fair trial should have fair advocates. She also trained. Every day, The same converted storage bay, the same routine, strikes, deflections, endurance, recovery. Voss opposite her, pushing, correcting, never relenting. You don't need to prove anything physically, he told her on day 12, after she landed a combination that sent him back 3 steps. The challenge is legal, not martial. I know, she said, resetting her stance. But if they void the trial, I need to be ready to win the next one, and the one after that, and every one after that until they stop trying. He looked at her for a long moment, then he raised his practice stave. Again, he said. On day 26, the internal faction made its move. Advisor Kellas, who had withdrawn his original protest, who had been quiet for months, who Caliph had assumed was neutralized, released a sealed document to the Outer Territory Coalition. The document purported to show that Voss had supplied Caliph with classified combat data from the Human Coalition during her trial preparation, data that gave her an unfair advantage. It was a forgery. Caliph knew it was a forgery because the classified data described tactical protocols that did not exist in the Human Coalition's actual doctrine. She knew this because she had studied the doctrine herself. Voss had given her the unclassified manual 9 months ago, and she had memorized it cover to cover. But the forgery was good enough to create doubt, good enough to stall the legal proceedings, good enough to shift the arbitration panel's attention from the constitutional question to a fraud investigation. They're not trying to win the legal argument, Caliph said, standing in the storage bay with the forged document displayed on her datapad. They're trying to bury it in process until the precedent expires. Yes, Voss said. He was standing very still, the stillness of controlled anger. And they're trying to discredit me specifically. If they can prove foreign interference, the betrothal is void regardless of Article 9. Can they prove it? No, because it didn't happen. Then we prove that. She looked up from the datapad. Publicly, before the arbitration panel convenes, we get ahead of it. Voss hesitated. Caliph. If I testify publicly, if I open my service records and training logs and every session we've ever had to scrutiny, it will be used. Not just against me, against you. They'll say you were dependent. They'll say I shaped you. Let them say it. Her voice was quiet, absolute. And then let them watch the recordings of our training sessions where you hit me in the ribs hard enough to crack one, and I got up and asked for another round. Let them see the bruises. Let them see what independence looks like when someone earns it hour by hour in a storage bay at 400. He was quiet. Soren. She used his name, not his rank, not his title. The name she called him when they were alone and the world was not watching. They want me to be afraid of exposure. They want me to protect the image of a princess who emerged fully formed and perfect. But I didn't. I was built. I built myself. With your help, yes, but every strike was mine. Every hour awake was mine. Every decision in that trial chamber was mine. And I will not let them take that by making me ashamed of how I got here. Voss's jaw clenched, released. His eyes were very bright. Okay, he said, then we open the records. The public testimony took place on day 29, 1 day before the arbitration panel was scheduled to convene. Caliph requested an open session of the Advisory Council, with full broadcast access to the 12 systems that had filed the challenge. She stood at the speaker's position, the same position where suitors had once stood to bid for her hand, and she opened every record. The training logs, every session, time-stamped, with biometric data showing her physical development over 18 months. The combat recordings, unedited, brutal, showing a princess who fell and bled and got up and fell again and got up again until she stopped falling. The tactical preparation notes written in her hand, not Voss's. Her analysis of each warlord's combat style, her study of Article 9's legal precedent, her strategic plan for the trials mapped out over 4 months. This is what preparation looks like, she said to the broadcast. This is what independence costs. It costs bruises and sleepless nights and the willingness to be bad at something for months before you are good at it. It is not given. It is not a birthright. And it is not foreign interference when a human teaches a Velanthi princess that she is allowed to be strong. The chamber was silent. Commander Voss was called to testify. He stood at the speaker's position, the same battered service jacket, the same quiet composure, and he opened his own records, his service file, his training certifications, his unclassified duty logs showing nothing but standard security protocols and authorized combat instruction. "I taught her to fight," he said, "as instructed by my security mandate. I taught her endurance because her safety required it. I did not give her tactical data, classified or otherwise. I did not give her strategy. I did not tell her to invoke Article 9. He paused. She told me, 3 days before the trials began, and my response was, 'Are you sure?' She said yes. That was the end of the conversation." Advisor Kellis was asked to authenticate the forged document. He could not. The metadata was inconsistent. The protocols described did not match any human coalition registry. The signatures were digital approximations. The forgery collapsed in 17 minutes. The arbitration panel convened the next day and dismissed the constitutional challenge unanimously. The opinion was 3 sentences long. Article 9 contained no gender restriction. The trial outcome was valid. The matter was concluded. The 3 internal faction advisors resigned within the week. Consul Terrigen withdrew his coalition's support for the challenge and sent a private message to Sovereign Ilyara. "Your daughter is formidable. I withdraw my objections." Ilyara did not reply, but she showed Caliph the message. "He is not wrong," the sovereign said. It was the closest thing to a compliment Ilyara had ever given. Months later, long after the political dust had settled, long after the new officer candidates had graduated, long after the advisory council had stopped filing quarterly complaints about the dual-role appointment, Caliph stood on the observation deck with Voss, watching the planet turn below. The viewport light caught the faint luminescence beneath her skin, the gold of her eyes, the silver-dark fall of her hair. She wore simple clothing, no armor, no ceremonial silk, just herself. Voss stood beside her, close enough to touch, not touching. That had always been their way, proximity without presumption. 2 people who chose to be near each other because the nearness was good, not because obligation demanded it. "The Outer Territory Coalition sent a trade proposal," she said. "I saw. It's good. Better terms than Terrigen has offered anyone in a decade. He's afraid of you." "Good." She turned her head. The light shifted across her features. "Not just me. He's afraid of what I represent, a precedent, a door that stays open." Voss nodded. His gaze was on the planet, but she knew he was listening with his whole body, the way he always did. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. For what? For never once in 18 months of training, in the trials, in the legal fight, in any of it, telling me what to decide. For being the foundation without ever trying to be the architect. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You never needed an architect." "No." She turned to face the viewport again. The planet, her planet, the dominion she would inherit and reshape, not because someone had given it to her, but because she had earned the authority to hold it. I needed someone who understood that. The silence between them was comfortable, absolute. The silence of 2 people who had chosen each other not out of desperation or obligation or political necessity, but out of the simple, radical recognition that the other person was exactly who they appeared to be, and that was enough. Below them, the Velanthi homeworld turned in its ancient orbit, patient and vast, carrying the weight of a precedent that would not be forgotten. Caliph Velsorin, first daughter of the Dominion, stood at the viewport and breathed. She was no one's prize. She was no one's ornament. She was exactly, precisely, fiercely her own. And beside her, quiet, steady, immovable, stood the human she had chosen, not because he had saved her, not because he had fought for her, because he had stood back and watched and believed, and never once tried to make her story about him. That was the recognition. That was enough.